Good evening. My name is Scott Peters, and I am chairman of the Plan Commission. We have a quorum, and the meeting is now in order. Is there a motion with respect to the minutes from October 9th?
Motion to approve the minutes of October 9th. Oh,
Press the button.
is it on now? It's on now. Motion to approve the minutes from the Plan Commission meeting of October 9th.
Seconded.
Any discussion? There being no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
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 The minutes are approved.
Colby, Lewis, and Margaret. Dubin.
Terry Dubin.
Terry Dubin, sorry.
We have two new members, Terry Dubin and is it
Lewis.
Colby
Lewis.
And I'd like to welcome them. The first item of new business is a proposed text amendment to the zoning ordinance relating to bed and breakfasts, 13 PLND 0103. And I recognize the staff who might want to speak to the proposal.
Good evening, Commissioners. At the October 16th zoning...
So I don't think you're on.
At the October 16th zoning committee of the Plan Commission, the zoning committee discussed amending the regulations for bed and breakfast establishments. Following that meeting, the zoning committee came up with a recommendation to divide bed and breakfast establishments into two different types. A type 1 bed and breakfast would be of moderate intensity and would allow a maximum number of guest rooms of up to 2 rentable guest rooms. It would be a permitted use. It would require owner occupancy, but without a specific definition of what owner occupancy is, and it would not require a distance requirement. Type 2 bed and breakfasts would be of a higher intensity with a maximum rentable 5 guest rooms, would require special use approval, would not require owner occupancy, and would also not require a distance requirement. On page 2 of the staff memo in the packet, that also lists city staff's recommendation, which is somewhat different from the zoning committee's recommendation. The major differences are that staff recommends that both types require special use approval, and that for type 1s, which are the moderate intensity, that the owner occupancy requirement would be defined as 33% owner occupancy. Additionally, type 2s, which would be the higher intensity, would have a distance requirement of 1,500 feet from other type 2 B&Bs. This all stems from an aldermanic reference to discuss the regulations for bed and breakfast establishments, specifically related to owner occupancy and distance requirements.
How would the commission like to proceed? Would you like to begin with discussion? Do you want to hear from members of the public who are present? There being no evidence to take tonight other than what the public might say.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure whether I'm the only one who's not on the zoning committee, but I actually would like to hear from the zoning committee as to why they would disagree with the staff's recommendations. I don't care whether we hear from the public first, but that is one thing that I really would like to hear from those who were present.
In the other
since
order.
I wasn't. What?
It may have happened in the other order.
Oh, all right.
Do you want to speak to that?
No, I think I would like to hear from the public
Well-
at this point, but actually I think they disagreed with us.
Yeah, but I think it's more important that we do fill in the Plan Commission members first, so there's some more background before we would take public.
Do you want to go?
You know, yeah, Melissa, you said that we didn't, that type 1 didn't require owner occupancy. We had discussed that, and in the table it says yes, but we never defined what it would be. So I just wanted to correct that.
Correct. For type 1s, it would follow the same regulation that's currently in place where owner occupancy is required, but with no specific definition to that, potentially you could have an owner who owns a 1% share of the property.
Okay. But it's still, I think, then I misunderstood you because I thought you said that when you were talking that we said we didn't.
I may have misspoke. I apologize.
I may have misunderstood. We felt that the permitted use on type 1, and please correct me if I'm wrong because I am often wrong, was that it would be too much of a burden on a couple just wanting to rent out a couple rooms. Was that our conversation essentially in a nutshell?
On the special use issue,
Yes.
I think it was.
And that it should just be a permitted use. Because we felt that if, you know, a neighbor that didn't want to have that, all they have to do is object and you can't have it. And we felt, I believe that was also part of the, somebody brought that up as part of the conversation. We felt that it is low intensity and that the impact was pretty minimal. Was there any other reason why I believe those were the three reasons that we did not feel it should be a special use. Did you recall?
I wasn't present.
Oh, that's right, okay.
Go ahead.
Push the green one on the microphone itself, Stuart. It's a new system.
There we go. I guess I didn't remember that type 1 was permitted. Frankly, I'm a little concerned about that. I'd like to revisit that as to whether it should be permitted or special. If it is special, they're going to go underground. I know that. There have been a lot of bed and breakfasts in Evanston, and I suppose because of the special use requirement, have never applied for a permit. But you know, a bed and breakfast can have an impact on a neighborhood, and.
But that's why we broke it between a type 1 and a type 2.
I understand.
That a high intensity usage definitely has an impact on a neighborhood. And it's very similar why we did not want to have a distance requirement for a type 1 as well, because the example we had used was perhaps you might want to rent a couple rooms in that house of yours, and a neighbor might want to do the same thing on the same block, and if we had a low intensity use, the distance requirement wouldn't be very fair to the first one in, who could be then doing it for 20 years, and then that neighbor down the block or kitty corner wouldn't have the ability to do it.
Okay. I'm sort of ambivalent on the subject as to whether a type 1 should be special use or of right, but
Now,
I understand the rationale.
So, Melissa, it is correct that if it's type 1, if a neighbor objects to it, then, or please explain the process, what happens?
With it as a special use?
Yes.
So for a special use, there would be a public hearing with the Zoning Board of Appeals, and all neighbors within 500 feet of the property would be notified. Any of those neighbors are eligible to come to the meeting and voice their concerns or submit written concerns, and that will be taken into consideration by the Zoning Board. However, just because someone objects, that does not automatically mean that the special use would be denied.
See, I also recall the conversation was the reason why we had a type 1, a low intensity, and that the B&B ordinance would benefit people who've lived in Evanston for a long time and were empty nesters, would have the ability then to be able to rent up to 2 rooms on occasion to help pay taxes or whatever else it is, so that long-standing residents of Evanston who've been in their homes for years have the ability perhaps stay in their home longer. And that was a conversation we also had as to why on a type 1, we would have it permitted use to make it easier for couples like that. I'm done.
Go ahead.
Okay. I agree with something Stuart said. I think if it becomes a special use, we will not see them come forward to get a license. And actually, I don't think they're going to come forward and get a license anyway. And I think history of what's going on in the city will probably prove that out.
For a type 1.
For a type 1.
Chairman?
Go ahead.
I think part of our thinking on the type 1 was, as Seth has said, or Richard, I'm not sure who, that we would expect that to be used by some homeowners who have lived in the city for a while and have become empty nesters. I guess with respect to impact, and the argument for special use seems to have to do with impact, I wonder if the impact of 2 bedrooms of bed and breakfast is any greater than the impact of having your 3 college-age kids come home. And I don't mean that facetiously. It seems to me that it is not only a minimal impact, it's almost the kind of impact you expect in a large home in a residential neighborhood in Evanston. 2 bedrooms occupied on an intermittent basis shouldn't surprise us.
Any other comments from commissioners before we see if anyone from the public wants to address us?
Well, do we want to have a conversation about the type 2?
Now let's put
Would divide the
one,
question.
Okay,
let's put 1 to bed, and if we can.
okay.
Are we going to take up parking issues, for example, with respect to type 1? Are we going to
I think
talk
we
about
will.
all the requirements?
I thought we'd probably hear what the public has to say and then take up the details. Unless you have something you want to raise first.
No. I mean, are we going to talk about type 2 right now and then let the public probably wants to weigh in, my guess is, on type 2, B&Bs.
I don't know.
I may be wrong.
Do you want to talk about parking first?
Well, I'd ask staff, what's the parking requirement for a type 1? Can it be on the street or the side yard? It can't, can it?
At the zoning committee meeting, there was little discussion regarding parking regulations, and the recommendation does not change what the current parking requirement is. So currently, parking is not allowed in a front or side yard, but there is no specific amount of parking that has to be on site. So potentially, bed and breakfast patrons could park curbside, and that would be permitted.
Okay. That was a concern of mine. That makes sense.
Anything else?
There was a 2-year requirement too, I think, in the staff proposal, which I think committee decided didn't make a lot of sense.
It was a what?
There was a 2-year that you live on the premises for 2 years before you could apply for a permit, a type 1 bed and breakfast, and I think the committee decided that was nonsense.
That's correct. I don't remember if that was type 1 or type 2, but there was that requirement on, we broke it into a type 1 and type 2. If you recall, it came as only one recommendation. Isn't that correct?
The original staff recommendation did split B&Bs between a type 1 and type 2,
okay.
but the original recommendation suggested that for type 1s, that there would be a 2-year occupancy requirement prior to establishing a B&B, with the intent that it would be getting at the empty nesters or people who are invested in the community, who are looking to do this not so much as a large-scale business, but as a side to their principal residence.
But I think we decided, at least in the committee, that that requirement did not make a lot of sense. Is that your record?
That's correct.
We did.
Could you get the sign-up list?
I think it confuses it by, I think people make comments on the one and then. Probably are. And we're going to hear what it's about too.
So we have 4 people that have asked to speak. The first one on the list. We'll add you. The first one is David Reynolds.
You have to swear them in.
Let me, if you're going to, anyone who's going to give testimony, you swear or affirm that you'll tell the truth.
I do. Thank you. My name is David Reynolds. Pardon me, I live at 204 Davis Street. A residential neighborhood is a piece of fabric whose threads are the families that live there. Those families generally have similar thoughts about and desires for the area in which they live. Most families view the intrusion of a commercial use as undesirable. The type 2 bed and breakfast you are considering is certainly a commercial animal, and its presence in a neighborhood can easily tear the fabric. Allowing B&Bs to congregate in any Evanston residential neighborhood will exacerbate that tear. It has been suggested in the past by city council members that residents rely on Special Use Standard C, the cumulative effect standard, to prevent the congregation of B&Bs. With 2 approved just 100 feet apart, it doesn't appear as though that standard will do anything to protect residential neighborhoods. Most of us have purchased our homes with the expectation, under the zoning ordinance, that we would live in an area that remained residential. If you look at the home occupation portion of the zoning ordinance, you can see how diligently the framers have protected the residential nature of our zoned areas. A B&B can't come close to fitting within the restrictions of a major home occupation. It is far and away too intense in terms of the ordinance. There is not much doubt that there will be more B&B applications in the future. In fact, one has been submitted for a property within 500 plus or minus a few feet of the approved B&B at 300 Church Street. A separation distance in the ordinance is the most reasonable and objective way to make sure that these commercial uses don't congregate and damage any particular residential neighborhood. Staff recommendation of 1,500 feet allows for an appropriate number of B&Bs in town, while making sure that no particular neighborhoods become commercialized. I also think it is appropriate that all B&Bs be special uses. If nothing else, it gives neighbors an opportunity to weigh in on what's going on in their neighborhood. And to Mr. Freeman's point about, I know he was told that it wasn't the case, but there were great objections to both B&Bs that have been licensed by neighbors, and they're both licensed. So objections do not turn down a B&B. Thank you.
The next person is
Hang on.
Go ahead.
So was that regarding type 2 or type 1 or both? Because I heard you start by type 2, and we are taking testimony on type 2.
taking testimony on
On all of it?
Everything.
Because we haven't discussed type 2 yet up here.
we're taking testimony on everything.
I believe all bed and breakfast uses should be special uses.
And do you have, did you also then believe that the distance requirement of 1,500 feet is for all as well?
No.
Okay, because I didn't hear that. I just heard you give testimony on type 2, so I would like to hear what your opinion is for type 1 and then distance requirements for type 1 for the low-intensity B&B.
I don't think there needs to be a distance requirement, but I do think it needs to be a special use that you don't get a congregation of them again.
Okay, thank you.
Victor Grimm.
Good evening. My name is Victor Grimm. I live at 1732 Judson Avenue. And I, this evening, support the staff recommendation as to the ordinance. The zoning committee recommendations, in my view, raise several concerns. And I'm addressing primarily type 1 now. The staff recommendation for type 1 is for a special use, which is the current situation as well. The committee recommendation is for type 1 to be a permitted use. In other words, you can put as many of them out there as you want without restriction, without any application, without anybody's opportunity to weigh in on it. If we take a specific example of what's happening even right now, real world, as you all know, 2 B&B applications have been approved in the corner of Church and Sheridan Road. Those are under construction now, and I'm not sure exactly when they'll be opening, but it looks like one of them will be opening quite soon. Meanwhile, we now have a third application within a half a block of that area at 1722 Judson, which happens to be next door to where I live. And I have appeared before the Preservation Committee and the Spark Committee on that subject. It is possible, and I hope will be the case, that application will be disapproved by zoning and potentially by the City Council. If that happens and this alternative ordinance is adopted, that's all wiped out, and suddenly, without anybody having any input, that B&B would have a right to open. You're shaking your head, and if you have a question on that point, I'd be happy to try to respond.
Well, that's not true because it's a high-intensity B&B. So the high-intensity
as I said, I'm addressing type 1.
But the one that has been applied, which is 500 feet from the other, is a high-intensity use.
It doesn't help to argue with the witness that when it's done, you can ask questions.
Okay.
So I'm not sure the point that's being made by Mr. Freeman, but the fact is that the 1722 has made an application under the current ordinance. Obviously, there's no other ordinance to do it. But if this ordinance were adopted, even though that application might have been rejected under the proposed ordinance that we're talking about here, since it is a permitted use, it would be a permitted type 1 use. It would be a permitted type 1 B&B. Because there is a under the zoning committee's proposal, it would be a permitted use, as I read it.
If it was limited to 2 bedrooms.
2 bedrooms.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But that's not what the application's for, correct, sir?
The current application is under the current.
But it's for many more bedrooms.
It's clear what his
The current application is under the current ordinance, which permits up to 5 bedrooms.
That's correct.
Right. The applicant has already said to the various commissions and committees she's appeared before that she may not use all of that. And she may not use it all the time. But nevertheless, it becomes a commercial establishment. So my concern is that without any restriction, without any distance restriction, and without any permitted use restriction, the area could become intensely populated with B&Bs. There would be type 1 B&Bs, of course, but they're still B&Bs, they're still commercial establishments. They still add to the intensity of the neighborhood. And it seems to me that just in terms of planning in a residential area, that saying it's open game. Anybody can do a type 1 wherever you want, as many as you want. And I think we have to be realistic about this, that the most likely places that there are to be B&Bs would be probably closer to the university, because that's probably where most of the of the tenants or guests would come from. And so what's likely to happen is that in the residential areas around the university, we are likely to see a proliferation of B&Bs. And the incremental effect of that is the thing that concerns me and many of my neighbors. Addressing the point that was brought up earlier about empty nesters and so on, and staff will correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I believe that it is permissible to rent rooms, many people do, to university students and so on, without getting a B&B license. You can rent a room. And if an empty nester wants to do that, I don't think there's a problem with that. But a B&B is a different animal. A B&B is a commercial enterprise. They're having guests from out of town, and not just a kind of transient, not just a university student who might be there for a year or two, but a parade of people coming in, different people coming in and out. I talked to a woman the other day who, in fact, I think it was you, who can speak for yourself about your experience with B&Bs. So my suggestion would be that under type 1, either that there be a distance requirement or that there be a permitted use requirement. The application for usage is not a very complicated document. It's pretty simple. It's a few pages. You can fill it in handwritten. You can submit it. It's not complicated. And if, in fact, people are in the situation where they're empty nesters and they need some additional income, that can be taken into account in the permitted use. But to say to the entire community, whether you're an empty nester or not, it's open game. Just open these things up all over the city. And it seems to me that that does not represent a very good planning for an R1 kind of neighborhood, kind that we live in. One other point I'd like to make, and that is that in the 1722 Judson situation, there's also a coach house. The coach house is rented, or is often rented. So then, in addition to the B&B rooms in the main house, you've got the rental situation going on at the same time. So you've got an additional proliferation of tenants and roomers and guests. So those are the reasons that I and many of my neighbors believe that staff has got it right in this case. And we urge that the staff recommendations be accepted.
Are there questions for Mr. Grimm?
I would just say that the gentleman makes a very good point on the special use process.
What's the difference in impact between rooms being rented, and let's assume that the renter owns a car and therefore parks and is in and out, and a B&B, same number of cars, same number of people, although maybe sporadic rather than constant? I don't see the difference in impact.
Well, I can think of a number of differences, if I may. Number one, in renting a room, you have a fairly permanent, if not a permanent, but at least someone who's there for a period of time. With a B&B, you have people transiently coming in and out constantly. You have a turnover of people. You're serving breakfast. You've got supplies coming in. You've got probably laundry, you've got to have a special garbage disposal activity with respect to a B&B. I think that's a requirement as well. And so I believe there's a difference in the intensity of activity.
You have failed to convince me.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I hear you. I don't see it.
well, if you lived where I did and had a B&B about to open next to you, you might see it closer to my way than your way.
Let me ask staff to clarify. Can you refresh our memory on the room rental requirements? Are there restrictions on renting rooms as opposed to operating B&Bs? If you know.
Renting rooms relating
The
to
witness talked about people
when
being
it's
able,
not a B&B.
people being able to rent rooms.
So there is a vacation rental license that does allow residents to operate what we call a vacation rental. It is not outright permitted. It has to be approved by a license that goes, it bypasses a public hearing, but it goes straight to the city council. So it doesn't have the same regulations and restrictions that a bed and breakfast has. And it's, the intent of it is for people who may want to do that a couple times a year, special occasions. It's not intended to be something that would be an ongoing thing.
And
like a bed
are
and
there
breakfast.
limitations that affect people who rent rooms to university students for long periods, or to others for long periods?
There are time limitations, so it couldn't be a permanent guest. And
So we had testimony that said there's current on the books ordinance that enables people to lease rooms to Northwestern students. Is that or is that not accurate?
It's not quite what I said, but let's see what
Okay,
she said.
then why don't we, I'm sorry, sir, then.
I'm just trying to find out. what-
Victor, what is your last name?
My last
Mr. Grimm.
name, Grimm,
Grimm.
G-R-I-M-M.
Mr. Grimm,
Yes.
then could you please then repeat then what you said if I
Yeah, no, what I said
mischaracterized
was
it?
that I wasn't testifying about what ordinances exist. I said it was my impression, and staff would correct me if I'm wrong, that I believe there is an ordinance that addresses renting rooms.
so if you're referring to a permanent renter, that would fall to the definition of family and how many unrelated people are allowed to permanently reside in one residence. So there would be a limit to that.
But you could rent one or two rooms permanently for the course of a year to a student from Northwestern?
Yes, potentially if it was, say, a couple who owned a home and they wanted to permanently rent out one room to one student, yes, that would be permitted.
What happens if they had 2 rooms or 3 rooms that they wanted to rent out?
They would be restricted to no more than 3 unrelated people in the household.
So today, you could permanently rent at least for the duration of a school year, up to 3 rooms in your household. 3 non-related.
It wouldn't be related to the number of rooms, it would be related to the number of people,
Okay, so up to 3 people.
3 unrelated.
May I clarify why I brought that point up? I brought that point up to suggest that for the empty nester example that was discussed earlier, that there are ways that they could achieve that objective. And what I'm suggesting further is that if that's the case, why is it necessary to embed in the B&B ordinance a provision that says that you will not have a special use? That was simply my point.
Okay. So the incremental effects that you were worried about is garbage collection, people, lots of different people coming in and out of the neighborhood, correct?
No, beyond that, I think,
For type 1,
no, I think that beyond that, I am concerned about the commercialization of our R1 neighborhoods. establishing multiple, maybe they're tiny businesses, but they're each a business, and how much proliferation of those little businesses, those little B&Bs, is it appropriate to have without any restriction, which is what this ordinance, proposed ordinance suggests.
Anyone else have questions for Mr. Grimm? That brings us to Mary Singh.
Good evening. I'm Mary Singh. I live at 1711 Hinman Avenue. And what Mr. Freeman first said about empty nesters being able to rent out to bed and breakfast people is exactly what the zoning committee that proposed the first ordinance, the ordinance that was passed in 1993 and worked on from 1988 until 1993, that's what we were thinking about. But you see, we assumed that they would be people who lived in Evanston. And that's why I'm a little concerned about the idea that somebody said it didn't make any sense to ask that the people be resident for at least 2 years. I think 2 years is kind of a minimum there, because you really, I'm sure, well, maybe you do, but I doubt that most of us want people to come to Evanston to buy a house just to have the ability to live in the house and pay for their mortgage through the B&B. In the first place, I doubt it would work, to tell you the truth, and you might end up with somebody in foreclosure. But I do think it would be a good idea if people who, and we really welcome those, the people who live in the town and want to stay here. It seems to me a good thing to have a bed and breakfast ordinance for them. All of you have been, I'm sure, as I have been, to many, many, many special use meetings before ZBA. Usually it's a developer who comes before ZBA, and that developer has a specialist, and the specialist who comes is somebody who is an expert on the value of properties. And no matter what it is somebody is building, it will never decrease the value of your property, whatever's next door to you. And maybe that's true, although I've always doubted it. But in the case of a bed and breakfast, I'm not sure that is true, especially if there is no special use requirement for getting those bed and breakfasts. Supposing I'm living in a house and next door to me, Widow Jones wants to have a bed and breakfast. I would probably support Widow Jones for her bed and breakfast. But if Mr. and Mrs. Smith on my other side then want a bed and breakfast, I think I'd be opposed to that, because I might want to sell my house. How do you sell your house to somebody when you've got a bed and breakfast on either side? If the person is interested in a non-commercial R1 district, he's going to find a house someplace other than mine, because I've got bed and breakfast on both sides of me. What's going to happen to the yellow house on Sheridan Road that has a bed and breakfast now on either side of it? I have no idea. I think the cumulative effect, which would be addressed in a special use hearing, is a very important thing for the neighbors. And as was mentioned, unfortunately, that doesn't always mean that the bed and breakfast will be declined. The permission for it will be declined, but at least you get to say something about it. And if they actually get a bed and breakfast and they actually have a license, if they are not living up to the requirements of that license, one would be able to object to that. And the city, I would hope, would enforce the law. However, we know that there are many bed and breakfasts in town, and nobody's enforcing the law that they need to be licensed. We don't have any licensed bed and breakfasts. It's been mentioned that we have 2, but in fact we have 2 approved, but neither of those is licensed. Now, that's all to have to do with type 1. Is it all right to say something about type 2?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. There are to be commercial bed and breakfasts. They should be separated, as staff says, I think, by 1,500 feet, so that there would be no more than 1 to a block. Actually, I think a commercial bed and breakfast, by even calling it that, means there's commercial in the R1. And it's not only going to be down by the lake. We've got bed and breakfasts now that are all over town. And if you have a commercial bed and breakfast, if it doesn't change your neighbor, you know, the house that Mr. Grimm lives in wasn't there when we moved in. There was a Hillel there in that corner where there are now 5 brick houses. You've probably been by that corner at the corner of Clark and Judson. There weren't any houses there at all. There was one place that Hillel ran, and it was a very beautiful place. And we would like to have maintained it, except that the people who wanted to maintain it came in were a group of architects. They wanted to have a commercial thing in our R1 district. And the ZBA denied that because it was commercial and we were R1, and we had becoming more R1 all the time. So now we have 5 houses there where we would have had commercial. And if we had, why didn't we want commercial there? Because if that was commercial, why couldn't the rest of the block become commercial? I mean, Mr. Peters teaches zoning, I believe, do you not, sir?
That's correct.
Yeah. What do they call it when somebody else already has something commercial and you want to have commercial too? You usually say there's a precedent for it, isn't it?
2 views. One view is precedent, and the other view is each piece of land is unique, and there is no precedent.
Huh.
Both views are in the cases,
because
and
when I've gone to
commentary.
meetings of the Zoning Board of Appeals, and there has been somebody there wanting to build something, they often mention the fact that there's a precedent 500 feet down the street and in the next block and over here. So I think precedent means a lot.
I should tell the commission that Mary Singh and I served together on the zoning board for many years, back when the zoning board was deciding special uses and many things that come before this body.
Well, you flatter me, sir. Actually, I was only on the committee that was rewriting the zoning ordinance.
That's right.
Because I'm not a lawyer, and most of the people on there were lawyers. So anyhow.
You'd make a very good lawyer, though.
Oh, thank you, sir.
I have great respect for you.
Yeah.
I don't always agree, but I have great respect.
And we have disagreed. That's true, Mr. Peters. I think too many bed and breakfasts on one block is just going to destroy the fabric of that block. As David Reynolds pointed out, when you move in with your wife, husband, sorry, you shouldn't do that anymore. When a family moves in with 3 children, whatever the complex of that family is, they want another family near them, at least on one side of them. So if you could possibly make it so that there's not one on either side of every house in Evanston, that'd be helpful. And by the way, I really appreciate so many of you coming out on a night like this. I don't know how you can stand it, coming to all these meetings. Bless you.
Thank you.
Please don't go anywhere.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Does anybody, I just wanted to make sure she was here before, didn't walk away, if there was questions for her.
Any questions? Go ahead.
I don't have a question. It's on. I think it's on now. I don't have any questions. I appreciate your comment in the past 2. This is no reflection on the past 2 comments, but I just want to say that was one of the most coherent, articulate, polite presentations that I've experienced while sitting on this commission, and I do sincerely appreciate it. I appreciate all your comments on this, and it does definitely make a difference. And I am a lawyer, and I do zoning, and quite frankly, you do what you just did probably better than me and a whole lot of other zoning lawyers, so thank you.
Sir. That's very kind of you.
I'd like to second that. I think you did a wonderful presentation, and I think you have some really great points. In terms, I would like to make a comment regarding the distance requirements.
Yes.
If you're still having a special use, the cumulative
Are you
effect.
talking 1 or 2 now?
On 2 here.
Yeah, on 2.
If you didn't have a distance requirement on any of them, if you had a special use,
Yes.
that's still taken into account on the impact.
The cumulative effect,
That's
right.
correct.
Right.
So, you go through that list of, does it meet standards, correct? So that is something that the board would be looking at if somebody came in and says, well, there's no distance requirement, I want to put one up. And the reason why we said no to a distance requirement was, as an example, I live at Lake and Wesley. If
Yes.
somebody put a commercial B&B in my neighborhood, let's say on my block, but then wanted to put one on Ridge, which is really a different neighborhood, they couldn't because of a 1,500-foot requirement. And to us, it was felt that that would be something that should be left up to the special use to decide whether or not the impact was negative to a neighborhood. Because in that example, look, I'm on Wesley.
Yes.
I do not consider Ridge at that point my neighborhood, even though that's within the 1,500 feet.
Yeah.
And so that's an example of why a recommendation was made not to have the distance requirement, but to leave it to the special use.
I understand that, and that's very well said. I wasn't at your committee meeting, and I'm sure I would have understood better had you said. And 1,500 feet, it is an arbitrary number. There's no doubt about it. What we really want is that there be a reasonable distance between them so that it doesn't impact the neighborhood negatively. And it's very hard to determine what distance that would be.
If I were sitting on to make a judgment on whether or not a special use would be permitted to have a commercial B&B surrounding on two sides of a house, I think I know what my answer would be. That would be onerous to the neighborhood and to the so. You have to expect people to have that sensibility that are on these committees. But I just wanted to let you know that's why we recommended not having the distance requirement, because if it's special use, you still have to meet all the issues of impact to a neighborhood.
Listen, could I mention one other thing? You said that one of you said that you doubted very much that people would come in. Very many people are going to come in to get a B&B in the first type. You know why that might be? And it's a bad thing.
If it's a special use.
If it's a special use.
Yeah.
But you know why that might be? And I think it's a bad thing because we really should have these places licensed.
I would agree.
I mean, it's dangerous not to have them licensed. But I live within 500 feet of the house Mr. Grimm was speaking about, so I got all the information about 1722 Judson. And in it tells you how much you have to pay to apply. It costs $347, if I'm not mistaken, simply to apply to get a bed and breakfast license, just to get the bed and breakfast approved. I don't know what the license costs. Maybe there's no. Do the staff know? Is there any additional cost?
The special use fee in an R1 district would run $275 plus a mailing fee, so it would probably come out to around $325, $350. Then there may be a minimal licensing fee. I'm not exactly aware, but if there is one, it's minimal.
Yeah. But you see, because of our neighborhood has a lot of multifamily dwellings in it, that meant that they had to mail to a great many people, so that must have raised the price to $347. But do you understand that of somebody who wants to rent out 2 rooms might be onerous? That might be something that could be addressed, that it could be a less onerous situation. People might come in more, and then we would have licensed B&Bs instead of the dangerous situation we currently have. Thank you.
Chairman,
Yes,
I'm going to turn this into a question.
go ahead.
In addition to the fee, is not the need to appear before the ZBA a form of onerous?
Mary, I think he's addressing it to you, or maybe I should say Ms. Singh.
It's a rhetorical question from someone who tried to get a little bit of an increase in the size of his garage and had to do the ZBA. That strikes me as more problematic than the fee.
You may be right. It happens that the applicant, well, no names involved, but an applicant currently came in. The applicant currently came in just by herself. And she did a good job in making her presentation, at least I thought, at Spark. I wasn't at the Preservation Commission. but people who want commercial bed and breakfast, well, the one example we have of people wanting what I would call a commercial bed and breakfast, certainly has 5 rooms for rent, comes in with a lawyer and an architect and 2 specialists, one in the value of the property will never go down, and the other in possibly on traffic. Maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe there wasn't a traffic person for that. How much traffic could there be? But that impresses. I don't know what you did. But are you a lawyer yourself, sir?
But I had one.
Many people come in with that much, and I'll tell you, when you're sitting over on, as we usually do on this side, wanting to object, and they've got all this heavy equipment, heavy hitters over here, you may be right. It may be intimidating for people, but if you've got nice people like this board, I don't think you'd worry about it.
Fantastic. Oh, my God.
The next person on the list is
May I ask a
Lawrence.
question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I get a sense that Mary, you simply don't trust the judgment of the Zoning Board of Appeals or the special use process, and that is the reason you want to require a distance, put in a distance limitation, because you don't think the Zoning Board of Appeals can make that determination.
Zoning Board of Appeals denied the previous 2 requests for bed and breakfast in this town.
Well, then you don't trust the city council. Is that it?
That is a very hard question. I think there are situations in which the city council, those people on the city council who have experienced the same thing near them are usually sympathetic to the neighbors who are concerned. Those who have never, they don't seem to feel the same way. That's what I've seen. But on the other hand, I'm friends with people on the city council who vote against what I want or in favor of what I don't want. So it's not that I don't trust them. I just think that they need to have some kind of rule too to follow, and having a distance requirement, which, by the way, they could simply overturn. They could simply say, in this particular instance, that wouldn't apply because this is up on Ridge, not down on Wesley, and therefore they could ignore that too. I've seen them ignore things that seem to me to be perfect. For instance, the requirement that somebody who lives in the home and has lived in the home and will be there all the time while the bed and breakfast is being run, the 1% person didn't seem to amount to that to me. But the lawyer for the city told them that was a 1% person was an owner. So you see that things can be twisted just a little bit in favor of one person and possibly not in another.
Any other questions for Ms. Singh before she sits down? Thank you. The next person on the list, I can make out the first name Lawrence and wine and a B and then the 3 more letters.
Weinberg?
That could be it.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. To begin with, I took a sample ordinance, and this is going to be my reference for everything I say, regarding B&Bs, to preserve and complement the residential character and integrity of the surrounding area. So that's the bar that I want to get over with everything I say. One B&B, another B&B, a third B&B, all lined up. And at some point, you're going to reach a tipping point where there's degradation to the neighborhood. But the problem is, with tipping points in general, with critical mass in all things scientific and social, you don't know where the tipping point is. And you probably never will. So in one instance, let's take a specific street with high hedges, large homes, deep setbacks. We can probably have as many Class 1 or Class 2 B&Bs as we want. They're basically impact neutral. But then at the same time, and I'm more concerned with the smaller B&Bs, which are individually innocuous, but in this case, we have a street with small homes, and someone paints their home that shocking pink that you often see in B&Bs. And then someone paints theirs that robin's egg blue, and someone does yellow, and finally the straw that breaks the camel's back is someone paints their house black with day-glow orange trim, and they call it the jack-o'-lantern B&B. And from a business point of view, it might be a very good idea. It might be very good marketing. But a business sensibility and a residential sensibility, I feel, are distinctly different and not necessarily compatible with these small homes being converted. Another concern, you have 4 B&Bs lined up. I'm picking the number 4 randomly. What it effectively becomes are 4 rooms times 2. It becomes a unit. It becomes 8 rooms. It's suddenly a bungalow colony. And if I and my friends want to come here for a reunion, what do? If they're available, we rent the entire block. And now there are 16 people in this small, concentrated area. And to the question of the intrinsic difference between someone who is your boarder and a hardworking graduate student at Northwestern versus people who are in for a reunion, it's very materially different. The Northwestern student doesn't go out to dinner and party and dancing every night. The people who are in for the party are here to have a lot of fun. And that is a very different kind of presence on the street at any given time. So you have these 16 people. They all get together in probably one backyard, whoever has the biggest deck. And suddenly, it's not one couple talking or 2 couples having a bottle of wine, having a good time. It could be 16 people, and suddenly you've hit the tipping point where it's not quiet on a summer's eve when everyone has their windows open. It's noisy. It degrades the neighborhood. Concern. You've got 3 or 4 B&Bs, and suddenly the neighborhood says, we're unhappy, we don't like it, it's ruined the neighborhood. If we can't be them, we're going to join them. And if everyone's allowed to open a low-intensity B&B and there are 4 of them, overnight you can have 8 of them, you can have 10 of them. And what you get whenever you hit a tipping point is typically this nonlinear growth, where all of a sudden 4 doubles or triples. I think it's also a problem with these low-intensity B&Bs, which don't seem dangerous, but I think they're potentially a Trojan horse. Concern. You've got the 3 and 4 B&Bs. Someone wants to buy a home and open a B&B, as ill-advised as it might be. Where should they do it? They should do it on B&B Row. They should do it where the B&Bs are, for the same reason that automobile dealerships build close together. So Bob Rohrman does all that advertising, and when you come to Bob Rohrman's, you have to pass my dealership first. They do it with restaurants, they do it with bars. It's called an agglomeration economy. And in a case like a B&B, if there's an established B&B, you're almost hoping and betting that if not you, one of the other B&Bs will be selected by Travel and Leisure, and all of a sudden, boom, your advertising is done for you. So I think these neighborhoods have the potential to grow and just be B&B rows. And to the people that preceded me, nobody wants to live there. I can't imagine any one of you would want to live there, certainly not I. I don't have a dog in the fight. I live in a high-rise. I will intend to live there, but for the benefit of the other people that live in the community, I don't wish that on anyone. I've got a concern. Someone on the block wants to sell their home, as was previously explained. So you go to your realtor and you get your comps, and you receive an unpleasant surprise. Your comp is 20% lower, and you ask a realtor, what's wrong? And for whatever reason, the realtor says, ask what you want, but nobody wants to live on B&B row. It could either help your value, increase your value, or decrease your value. I think clearly one would expect it would decrease your value if you have a non-B&B on B&B row. I think there is a built-in problem to this density issue, and I think it's much easier for all of us to deal with it now than to fix it after the fact. People's homes are their biggest assets, both financially and emotionally, and I can't see any reason to put them at risk, especially for this particular business model, which I feel might be lacking anyway. And finally, a couple ideas, concrete ideas, if I might. I'd like to propose 3 B&Bs per ward. Low intensity, 3 per ward for a total of 27. That way, this is new to us, we walk before we run, and building on top of that, everyone gets a 2-year license. So at the end of 2 years, you can evaluate individuals and the program both. If the individual worked out well, they may renew their license. There may be a natural selection process where they don't renew their license, but you also have the opportunity to engage in the selection process. Further, if the program's not working out well, I'll spare you going through the process again. You could really practically say, let's not renew anyone, everyone lapses, and the program is gone on its own. It was a noble experiment that didn't work. Or after 2 years, you can say, let's go up to 4 per ward, let's go up to 5 per ward, whatever you want to do, but I think it gives you flexibility. Thank you for listening.
Are there questions of this witness? Any questions?
I've got to leave before the questions start.
Thank you. Ma'am, you said you were going to. Yes. Were you sworn? Were you sworn as a witness? I think you weren't here when we swore the witnesses.
It's so funny. I can be sworn as a witness.
Good. Do you promise, swear you'll tell the truth at this hearing?
Yes, I do.
Could you identify yourself and spell your name since I don't have it for the record?
Linda Damashek, Damashek.
And what is your address?
1318 Judson.
Please proceed.
Okay. I may be the only person in this room who has lived next door to a B&B. Not for a short period of time, for 10 years. So I have a lot of experience, and I can answer your question, Mr. Ford, about what the difference is between a supposedly low-intensity B&B and renting to, a student or, because where I live, there are coach houses, there are students renting rooms, we have the whole gamut. The major difference is very much of an emotional one. When you have a student, when you have someone in a coach house, they're just another neighbor. They're a neighbor. You know who they are. They're a part of your fabric of your community. When they are a B&B resident, it's a hotel next door to you. There's suitcases coming and going. It's a lot of people that you don't know. I had young children at the time. I personally felt as though my neighbor was making money at my personal privacy and peace of mind. My kids had no idea who was coming and going. With the person in the coach house, well, we know that person's name. We know who they are. They're a neighbor. So emotionally, it's a very, very different thing. It's very intrusive. It's very disruptive. I really don't wish that on any one of you, but since you are deciding on this, I think you really need to make this decision thinking as though you had a bed and breakfast next door to you, whether it be the 5-room or whether it be the 2-room. I really hope that you really, really think about how you personally would feel if you had that number of people that you don't know going in and out on a regular basis, because the person who runs a B&B, don't kid yourself, it is a business. They are there, they are doing it to make money, and they are making money at your expense, at the expense of your peace of mind, at the expense of your property value. It's really not pleasant, and it really doesn't matter if it's a supposedly low-intensity one with, empty nesters, or a high-intensity one. It's more people, it's more of an intrusion in your life. And for there to be any consideration that you wouldn't require a special use permit, you absolutely, an R1 district is supposed to mean something. If you just say it's open season and anybody can open up a B&B and there's no restrictions on the numbers of them, that's really not an R1 district anymore at that point. And I think that you should be honest with yourselves with that too, because you really are jeopardizing the integrity of the R1 zoning designation. So I think because of that it's absolutely imperative that you require them to have a special use permit so that neighbors know what's going on. Hopefully have a little bit of a say. I unfortunately had none. But I think that that's a requirement. I think there should be a distance requirement either type. Maybe it could be less for a 2-room versus a 5-room. But again, think about you personally living next door to one of those, either one. And I think that the distance requirement's important, special use requirement's important. The owner occupancy is important. I experienced distress with an owner-occupied situation. And I can't even imagine if it was a corporation, a limited, a business in your residential neighborhood. Amazes me, but anyway. So neighbors definitely should be notified and be able to be comment. And I basically agree with all the things that the other people had to say before that, and I guess what I bring to this table is really personal experience and a request that you really think seriously about you being in this situation. So, thank you.
Questions of this witness?
Where did you live that you had a B&B next to you?
1318 Judson. I had a B&B at 1316 Judson.
Here in Evanston.
Here in Evanston. 10 years.
And I live on the other side. I live on Hinman, so I happen to know the people who had the B&B. I take it you would not favor B&Bs anywhere if you had the authority to make this decision. You would have
if I could make this decision, having had the personal experience, I would say you would do it in an area that's not R1. You do it in an area that's, more commercial, more multifamily, more, anonymous people coming and going. That would be my recommendation. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's an appropriate thing to do to your neighbors in an R1 district.
Do you know how many B&Bs are, because I don't live that far, how many B&Bs are located, say, between, in your area? Say, going down as far south as, you're north of Dempster? Mm-hmm. So let's say down to Maine, so from Maine all the way up to Sheridan, and then from the lake over to Chicago. How many B&Bs are there in that area? Do you know?
From Maine to where?
From Maine up to the university, and then the lake over to Chicago.
Well, I haven't done a survey of them,
I'm not asking,
but I know there's the two that have been approved formally. I know that there's one near Maine, probably about a block by Lincoln School.
Okay. Okay. No, I was just curious because I did not know. And I wanted to know because I think it does. I think the points that all of you make are extremely relevant. I think Evanston is unique to the extent that you have the R1 by the lake, and you have people that actually live in the homes. I mean, they conduct their living. I mean, they live in the homes. They have families, and I think it would be pretty disruptive. I have 2 kids, and I wouldn't want to live next door to a B&B. If I wanted to live next door within a hotel, then I would just either get, a condominium in a hotel condominium or downtown, which raises another point. I wonder, to the extent that we're considering regulations regarding B&Bs, personally, I just think that the way that Evanston has been developed and how it's used by its residents is, I wonder what we're doing to our downtown if we allow for the proliferation of B&Bs, because I thought we were supposed to be developing our downtown to be attractive to people to visit. We have, 3 hotels, we've got the, and quite frankly, that's not far from the lake. And when we have that outstanding benefit of having our downtown within not just walking distance, but beautiful walking distance to the lake. So I guess I just don't understand, I guess why we would be promoting bed and breakfasts in those areas when we could be promoting or should be promoting, I think, those types of uses like in our downtown. Not bed and breakfasts, but, a hotel type of, atmosphere. But I mean, I understand that there's probably could be some, but I think the gentleman here pointed out, what's that tipping point? Who do you disrupt? Who's willing to basically live under those circumstances? And I agree with you. I think you make some very good points, but something to think about.
Is there other questions or comments for this witness?
I have one comment. I just to note that other communities don't struggle with these issues because they simply don't allow bed and breakfasts. We're the only one on the North Shore, as far as I know.
And I've thought the question you point, I think, well, if everyone goes to bed and breakfast, who's going to go to the Hilton Garden? So I've scratched my head over that one. So thank you.
Is there anyone else? Could you come forward and identify yourself, and we'll swear you as a witness? And
I didn't sign. I couldn't get here in time to sign the list. Is that okay?
give me the correct spelling for your name. I'll put it on the list.
Thank you. A-N-N-A, Anna C. Roosevelt, R-O-O-S-E-V-E-L-T. 1028 Judson. You're hearing from Judson today.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I myself love bed and breakfasts, although my argument will not be too favorable today. I much prefer to stay in them when I go to Minneapolis or San Francisco because they're calm and quiet, more like my house. My house was in the southeastern white division before it existed, before Evanston existed. It's the old white house that the Dillinghams built in 1854. In the Depression, the house became a rooming house because nobody could afford to maintain it as a single-family home. Many people lost their jobs, and there was a big change in the distribution of families. And in Evanston, in my neighborhood, and the neighborhood north of me, Ward 1, there's been such a change with our recession, as it's being called. Many people lost their jobs and could not maintain the mortgages, and so they lost their houses, and the houses have stood empty. And only slowly are they being refilled, but those families are gone. Families with children. A word also about the interaction between your committee and the lady in purple who spoke earlier. There is, I'm afraid, some doubt and lack of trust of both some of the committees, such as the zoning committee and the town council, by residents, because I believe, many of us believe there have been some bad decisions that seem short-sighted. Decisions sometimes seem to have been made from motivations because someone received a donation for their campaign. I myself I believe that there should be limits to campaign donations that prevent people with a lot of money from influencing city representatives. So I just want to explain why sometimes we may seem harsh or aggressive, and it's because we're worried.
Fortunately, we don't run for office.
True.
So we don't
You're
take campaign
You're appointed
donations.
by persons who run for office.
And we don't get paid either.
We don't get paid.
Yes.
So,
Point is?
so tell us about bed and breakfast.
Still, there are people who run for office who do get.
That's not relevant to what we're here to discuss and to hear. what you have to say.
I believe it is. I believe. See, I'm presenting my points of view, and you can present yours when I'm finished.
Let her
Thank
finish,
you.
but
And I won't.
probably we need to stay
I won't
something
speak
about B&Bs.
for too much longer. I also believe that it's undermining our hotel industry to proliferate bed and breakfasts, although I enjoy them myself. And our neighborhoods are very low-key and very safe, really, at least where I live. And they have a quality that kids run from one house to another, and neighbors talk to each other over the fence. And I do believe that having densely clustered bed and breakfasts that have strangers come to stay for pay isn't a good idea. So if bed and breakfasts are to be okayed, and I'm not certain they should be in this particular zoning area, I do believe that they should only be residents of the house who have the bed and breakfast. I don't think they should be commercial or invested in or anything like that. It's more in sync with our neighborhoods to have it be one of us, and one of us may need to make money to even stay in the house, which is okay by me. But I would like there to be distances. I would like there to be special use permits. All of that, I think, is really important. I think there's a reason why many communities don't have bed and breakfasts, because it does have the threat of changing the quality of life in the communities. And that's what we love about Evanston, is the neighborly, relaxed, and diverse nature of the community. Thank you.
Is there someone that wishes to ask a question on my right?
I can fix that.
Turned off the light. Someone on my left.
Thank you, Ms. Roosevelt. I appreciate your testimony. And I hear you on you'd like it to be resident only, one of us that gets to, would have it B&B. I, for one, also agree with you about the quality of life. We don't want to have an impact on the quality of life. I do have a concern about the distance. You had said that there is, especially on the type 1, that there are many homes that people had to sell their homes during the most recent recession because they couldn't afford a mortgage payment. And you just said that in this instance, it might be a good thing to have somebody be able to rent a few rooms. If you had a distance requirement of 1,500 feet, you're excluding maybe a very large number, or maybe just one additional home that might need to have a B&B, be able to rent a couple rooms, be able to pay the mortgage. And from my perspective, that's just not fair. That's your first in, is the person who gets to keep their home in that instance.
Well,
You have an issue.
I do have an answer to that, if you don't mind. I run my little exercise throughout this neighborhood, this sort of zoning area, and I notice where the houses are closed, and they tend to be quite dispersed, fortunately. I haven't seen, in fact, any that are clustered. I think it's just a chancy thing. It's almost random.
But they could be clustered, right?
That's right, but I don't believe that there's an inborn right for everybody to have a bed and breakfast. So many people might want to have one, but they wouldn't be able to because that would change the character of the neighborhood. Yes, so there's different rights, different people's interests, and then you make a balance.
So again, in my neighborhood, I live at Lake and Wesley. Somebody at Ridge and Greenwood, which is not my neighborhood, but I believe would fall within that 1,500-foot circle, they would be excluded. I don't see any impact there, so I'm sorry.
You're going to get a chance to argue with your fellow commissioners.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Anyone else would like to ask me a question?
I think I see an alderman.
I'd like to speak if I
Please come forward, and we'll swear you in, and you can speak too.
Thank you.
For the recording, could you identify yourself?
Yes, I'm Judy Fisk, F-I-S-K-E, and I'm First Ward Alderman. Good evening,
Judy,
everyone.
before you talk, let me just swear you in.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you swear to tell the truth at this hearing?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Thank you for not only serving, but welcoming us here tonight. I appreciate that. I wanted to let you know that we had a ward meeting in the First Ward last night, and this was a lively topic of discussion. The ward meeting was well attended, and I just wanted to give you an overview of what the residents had to say. I'm sure you've heard most of that tonight. They're concerned about the proliferation of B&Bs on the lakefront, especially, but most especially commercial uses. And they're also concerned about what amounts to redefining R1. And I will back that up by saying throughout my adult life, I've spent many, many years protecting the fragile residential neighborhoods in the First Ward. And unlike other wards, sometimes I look at Northwest Evanston, where you can just see house after house for block after block after block, and it seems like heaven. There are not quite so many pressures as there are down in the First Ward. We have the pressure from the lakefront and all the uses of the lakefront, pressures from the university, pressures from the downtown, and all of the traffic that's coming through as well. So in some places along the lakefront in the First Ward, the residential R1 blocks are that's 1.5 blocks of R1, and that's it. So we're very conscious in the First Ward about what affects basically the residential quality of our neighborhoods. We pay some of the highest tax revenues. I don't know whether any of you have seen the assessor's report of where the property taxes fall in Evanston. A large burden of that falls on the First and the Third Wards. And I think people come expecting a certain quality of life. I sold real estate for 20 years, and I can tell you all those years with thousands of people sitting in my car looking at properties, no one ever asked me to live next to a B&B. They never said, where's the first B&B? I want to live next door to that. What they're looking for is they're looking for a shared community. It doesn't have to be a single family house, but it has to be a shared community, and that's people who share a common interest of what it is to live in Evanston, what it is to enjoy your neighborhood, to participate as part of your neighborhood and with your neighbors. So the folks last night were very clear. They said they wanted the special use to run with the land, not with the owner. I think that's very important, as B&B might possibly turn over. I'm sorry, run with the owner and not with the land. Thank you very much. They attended last night, so this is a good thing. While sympathetic with the original intent of the 1993 ordinance and the mom and pop concept, and I really appreciate Mary Singh's input on that, I think the idea that 2-bedroom B&Bs could proliferate without the value of it going through the special use process does create a problem, as Mr. Weinberg also alluded to. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong, we do allow single-family homeowners to rent out to 2 unrelated persons. Is that correct?
It would be dependent on who they have in the family currently residing on the property, but potentially.
Right, so we don't go into the 3 unrelated. Yeah, but when my husband and I first bought our house, he was a student, law student. I was a part-time working mom, and we had a couple of students living in our house, and that helped us pay for our mortgage. That was not a B&B. That was leases with students who came for the year. We knew them. Our neighbors knew them. We would have block parties together with them. Everyone, everyone was assured that it was still a neighborhood, and all the folks around were well known by everyone, especially the children who would play in the neighborhoods. So that option is still available for people. If you need to make some money, if you're mom and pop and you're having trouble paying your taxes, whatever your circumstances are, you still have the option of renting out to students or to someone else on a lease basis. It does not have to be a transient basis. So commercialization of the lakefront is a major concern. And the special use process, I just wanted to bounce around to that a little bit. As we've gone through the two approved Bs and Bs, the discussion through ZBA and council has been a real interesting one, because it was when the first B&B hit council, it was like, oh, well, we would never allow one on the same block. And then shortly thereafter, within the next year or so, we were allowing one 2 doors away. And the property owner that lived in the middle between those two did not feel comfortable coming forward. I am one of those weird people that like Evanston, the history of ZBA meetings in Evanston. I've gone back and looked at a lot of them, and it's real interesting that because some of the people who are most affected are the people who don't show up because they're afraid they'll offend their neighbors. So I'm not sure that you can take that as a reliable indicator that they have no effect, because I think some people really are intimidated and just almost give up. So the rows of mom and pop Bs and Bs lining the block again. Mr. Wine referred to that was a concern last night. We talked a little bit about the proposed third B&B within a 1 block radius of the 2 that have been approved, and that's coming before ZBA early in January. So I think what we're seeing in my ward are now 3 Bs and Bs. And certainly 3 Bs and B applications. It's made people feel very uncomfortable. It's made people worried about what's happening on the lakefront, made people worried about what is the long-term impact on the residential quality and enjoyment of life in these neighborhoods, and I share their concerns. And I don't envy you for having to work through this, but that's why you're here, that you get to talk this out. But it's an entirely different discussion when it does get to council. So we rely on you putting on your hats, and you are residents of Evanston. I mean, you can identify with these people as well as I can. I've been elected to represent them, but you're one of them. You're one of the members of the community. And so I would just ask you to look at it from that point of view and make your best judgment for us.
Any questions of Alderman Rainey? Not Rainey, Fisk. Sorry. You guys are very different. Sorry about that. You even look different.
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Alderman Fisk. Oh, when you say it's a different matter when it gets to council, what do you mean by that?
Well, the council has different, the council, while we're supposed to follow standards and make decisions based on the standards that have come to us, that's not always what happens. So when an alderman, for example, will say, I would not ever approve a second B&B in the block, and then does, there's a reason for that. I wouldn't opine right here what that reason would be. I don't know what the reason is. But I look at you as being non-political, and that's a good thing.
But we just recommend.
We
just recommend, and
I know, but you're part of the process, and the process is really important.
It's supposed to be different before council. They have much more, many more things they can consider.
Yeah.
Yep.
And different accountability because you guys are elected.
Yes.
Let me suggest that we take up first the question of special use, secondly the question of distance requirements, and thirdly the owner occupancy requirement. I think that will be the easiest way to approach this. I should ask if there's anyone else that wanted to testify before I. So let me see if there are any comments about the special use requirement and whether the recommendation from staff should be adopted by the commission.
I have a question for staff. The current ordinance is a special use, correct?
Correct.
How many applications have we had besides these two recently?
There is one application that is currently pending a zoning board hearing, so there's been a total of 3 that I'm aware of ever.
How many ever? So how many have there been in the last 10 years?
3.
3. How many have there been in the last 20 years?
I think Melissa hasn't been here 20 years.
Okay. So with the current ordinance, which is actually more permissive than what we're even looking at doing now, we've had a total of 3 applications, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I think, Mr. Chair, that I would favor a special use in the type 1. And I'm really not worried about a whole row of B&Bs, but I still think the special use is helpful. The type 1, and of course in type 2, if we go there. But for type 1, I would favor a special use.
Other comments?
Yeah, I sense a dilemma here. Talking strictly about type 1 now. The whole discussion seems to be, the premise seems to be that we're talking about homeowners using their homes for B&B. One possibility that suggests is that we define owner occupancy as 100%. You own it. It's your home. It seems to me that that might lessen some of the concern about commercialization. But the dilemma I see is one here between the emphasis on owners doing something and the things like distance requirements and special uses which make it more difficult for owners to do it. Now, if we want owners, empty nesters, people who who want to stay in a large home in Evanston when their family doesn't need it, if we want that as a matter of policy, then it seems to me maybe we have to give way on some of the issues like distance and special uses that make it more difficult to do that. So in some ways, I think I would try to, the separation between type 1 and type 2 seems to me really important. And I hear all the arguments for special uses, and you make compelling arguments. But if we're interested in having these homeowners, these families, stay in their homes in Evanston, and this is a reasonable way for them to do it, then it seems to me we need to let them do it. Thank you.
Go ahead.
It seems to me that, number one, I'm not sure that our policy should be, let's permit people to open B&Bs to stay in their homes, as opposed to the current alternative, which is letting rooms. There's a difference. And I think that people can already let rooms without there being B&Bs and satisfy the public policy, if there is, if we think there should be one, of opening occupancy to these homes. Basically, bottom line for me is I am convinced that a special use should be a process that those who wish to let out rooms on a transient basis, whether it's type 1 or type 2, need to go through so that the neighbors and our zoning board and council have some control over the proliferation.
I am not persuaded by Mr. Weinberg's scenarios, but I too think a special use process is important because cumulative impact is possible. And I think that there can be cumulative impact with little B&Bs and big B&Bs, more easily with the big ones. I did have 2 B&Bs across the alley from me, and they were innocuous in my experience. But it's not always that way. And so I think the special use process will allow consideration of the special local conditions, such as whether Ridge is in your neighborhood or not. And it just seems to me it's appropriate for this kind of use. Go ahead.
I am not in favor of special use for type 1. I am for type 2. I think the difference between letting a room and a B&B, there's a couple differences from an owner perspective. You might not, one is financial. You're going to be able to charge more per night than you would be able to do leasing for, let's say, 9 months. But more importantly, you may not want to rent a room and have somebody in your house for 9 months or 12 months. It may be something you might want to do during the summer months. It might be something you might want to do just over holidays when people come in to visit family. There might be a whole host of reasons for doing that. And I do think that special use, while it does protect neighbors, in the last umpteen years that we've had a B&B policy, we've not had any applications for B&Bs except for these 3, and all of them would classify into a type 2. So I don't think special use is required for a type 1.
Go ahead.
The fact that we haven't had applications doesn't mean that we haven't had B&Bs come and go.
That's true. Well,
And to address one other issue, we see this special use as a kind of a barrier for somebody. What do you actually see as the barrier? Are you talking about cost or time?
Mm-hmm.
Both of those?
intimidation.
Yes, both.
Intimidation. In that case, I don't see people going through the process. I think they'll have unlicensed B&Bs. Okay.
Any other comments?
Well, I too am in favor of the special use for the type 1 and the type 2. Anybody who's going to be running legitimately a B&B or any developer is going to factor in the cost of their development project, which would be getting the zoning approvals that they need. And they're going to ultimately pass that cost off on to their customers, however they're going to do it over time. It's really kind of a sunk cost. It's a development cost. They're going to need to hire, as I'm sorry, Ms. Mary saying, they're going to have to hire specialists. And I would actually, although it's not part of the recommendation, I would even suggest that it be a requirement that they have specialists, appraisers, and consultants. It doesn't have to be an army and doesn't have to be duplicative, but they should have specialists to come in to substantiate their point and it not be rubber stamped that just because the appraiser says that he or she does not believe that the proposed use would have a deleterious effect on real estate values. I think that the city of Evanston, depending on, budgetary constraints or issues, I think when it comes to this B&B issue, because it is such a sensitive issue, I think it is an issue that would warrant the city having its own independent consultant, appraiser, to weigh in and render an opinion. But at the end of the day, I think the special use process, what it does is it puts the elected representatives on the spot. And what I mean by that is, if uses are allowed and the elected representatives are allowing it to happen and they're not responding to their constituents, then they will not be elected again. And people will know when that starts to rise up to the point that they're concerned about their position. Because if I'm an alderman, like the alderman who spoke, they should be responsive to their constituents. And to the extent that other aldermen are not responsive or necessarily respectful of an alderman's prerogative in their ward and considerate of what their constituents' concerns are, I have a problem with that as an Evanstonian. I think it's significant what an alderman thinks in response to what their constituents want. So, that's another discussion for another day, but I'd like to hear about, that, because that concerns me. I'm not aware of it. I just assumed that the alderman's prerogative essentially carries a day in other places, I know. But I am in favor of the special use for both, and I think that actually the standard should be a little stricter, because I think anybody wanting to have this use should at the end of the day be able to convince or meet the standards, but most importantly convince their neighbors, their potential future neighbors, that this is a use that's acceptable to them, because they're going to have to live next to them. So if the homeowner is unhappy, the B&B owner is going to be unhappy. That means the community is unhappy. And no one's going to be happy in that situation. And I think that the best way to resolve and address that issue is through having a very robust, reasonable but strict procedure to allow that particular use.
Other comments from board members? Do you want to take a vote on this issue or discuss all the other two issues first?
Why don't we discuss?
Okay.
If anybody else.
But then divide the vote.
I think we need to divide the vote because
Absolutely. Okay.
because they are interrelated.
Yeah, I just might get influenced by some of the other conversations. So
let's look at the distance requirement. Let's talk about the distance requirement.
Now, are we talking here strictly about type 1, or are we talking about both classes?
Well, I certainly think we need to talk about type 1, okay, but also there may be comments about type 2. I have more trust in the special use process as one that can explore cumulative effect. But nonetheless, I think a distance requirement might be useful. 1,500 feet would allow 3.5 of these per mile. That's not very much. And certainly, I think it's not appropriate for type 1. A block is about 660 feet, figuring 8 blocks per mile. So I wouldn't want to see a distancing requirement greater than that for type 1. And I could live with no distancing requirement for type 1 and leave it to the zoning board.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I could live with no distancing requirement for type 1 and leave it to the zoning board under the cumulative use standard to try to avoid tipping points and adverse impact.
I think I could agree to that. I still don't want to have a special use, but if you were giving us, if we were going to vote special use or I would take a special use without a distance requirement. I think a distance requirement is just not fair. If a goal is to enable homeowners to be able to stay in their home longer, if they have a hard time, not lose their home by able to lease some rooms, I think if you have a distance requirement, that defeats that whole purpose for doing this.
Chairman?
Go ahead.
It seems to me, Seth, that the whole discussion of the special use has been as a way of enforcing a distance requirement without calling it that. The argument has been that cumulative impact will, in fact, prevent proximity. It hasn't in the case of the 2 licenses that have been granted, but that seems to be the argument. So I think we're damned if we do, damned if we don't in terms of the distance requirement. I might go in the other direction and suggest no special use, but a distance requirement, not 1,500 feet, and I wouldn't measure it in radius, I'd measure it in linear feet along the block, which gets at your Wesley and Asbury concern.
But it doesn't get to Commissioner Shore, who lives a half a block from me on the other side of the street. If I wanted to lease a couple rooms, which I don't, and he did, it's first in. And then I'm disqualifying him or whoever buys that house for the next, if I'm in my house for 20 years.
Yeah, but the assumption of the special use permit is that you're going to disqualify the second person in if they're too close because you're going to argue cumulative impact. So there's a distance requirement here one way or the other, seems to me.
But it's cumulative impact on the next block over, but it's only a half block away, or your next door neighbor.
Well, it might be that Mr. Ford's suggestion of how it's measured is a good idea. I don't have a problem with first in issues. I think we have a lot of experience with that kind of thing, and highway billboards are sort of the prototype for me. And the cumulative impact is my way of thinking as an attorney who once represented billboard companies and does no longer. I think it's a real good example of cumulative impact, and the only possible control is you say, well, now there's enough, and first thing, last thing. I mean, we draw lines all the time in the land use business, and yes, it is arbitrary where the change is from R1 to R2, 1,500 feet. But I think we don't have any choice in trying to preserve the community. But this idea of looking at linear feet along a street is intriguing.
And I'd measure linear feet along the center line of the street so that it can move in any direction. It doesn't have to just stay on your block.
I think I need more explanation.
If the proposal is to build a bed and breakfast here, I want the linear feet to extend this way, or this way, or this way.
Along streets.
Along streets,
including turns.
yes.
That's nifty.
What about alleys and behind you? That's linear feet, any direction. I mean, what's the difference then about drawing a circle? If you're going around the corner, and if you're going down the other block and going that way, and it's the same thing as drawing a circle.
No.
Well, okay, so then the guy behind me in the alley, right behind me, on Asbury can open a B&B because he's not on my street and he's not around the corner and he's not around the corner the other way. He's actually on the other block, but he butts up to my yard.
I think it should just be a radius because I think if you, I mean, quite frankly, I would actually, I'd go beyond the 1,500 just because of the position that I'm taking in terms of, imposing restrictions. But I think if you do the 1,500 and if you go down the street and then down the street, I think what happens is that you end up eating away at that 1,500. And if my math is correct, or at least my geometry or whatever, if you go down streets and you don't make it just a direct line from use to use, I think you potentially can eat up that 1,500, which would then allow, I think, more opportunity to have that type of use. And I'm of the position that there should be less of it. So.
Mr. Chairman?
And I'm sorry. And the last point is I'm pretty sure that the 250-foot requirement is for applications. It's within 250 feet of a particular use. So it's usually you just draw it out from the particular property. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that right? For applications?
Current distance requirements that the city has are done by radius.
Right.
Go ahead.
And I suggest that rather than complicating things, to the extent that we vote that there be a distance requirement, that we use the same way of calculating it that we currently do for every other purpose.
I'm convinced.
I think that was the point I was making. I hope I did.
Go ahead.
Should have asked me to sing.
I think I'm a voice of one here, but I have a lot of confidence in the special use process. I really do. I would not favor distance requirements.
You're a voice of two. Three. At least. Three? Okay.
I mean, I understand that there are political forces in play once you get to the city council, but I have a lot of faith in that zoning board of appeals. They don't let much slide through. I can tell you from my casual observation over the past year or so.
Well, my response to that is because we're a recommending body, I think I think a distance requirement is a pretty potent restriction. And the basis for my recommending it is because procedurally, once we recommend it, that doesn't mean it's going to become law. Is that a fair point? What that does is our recommendation then puts the onus on the city council, correct? So if the city council wants to overturn that and they believe that there shouldn't be a distance requirement, then I would like for them to take that position and then vote on it and let it play out at the city council level. Because what that would do is it would demonstrate that the city council, in response to their constituents, believe that they are in support of, if they do vote in favor of not having the restriction, that they are in favor of, having a relaxed standard for B&Bs. So I would actually put it on them to cast that vote.
Well, they could also change what we said. If we say there's no restriction on distance, they could also cast a vote and say, no, we're going to change that and make sure that there is a distance. So it goes both ways.
And I'm totally okay if they actually want a distance requirement, because that's what I'm in favor of.
Right. So
but I don't want to. I want them to actually have to overturn a recommendation versus us recommending it, and then they can say, well, we just adopted the recommendation procedurally.
Okay.
Other comments? Go ahead.
It seems what goes around comes around, and that we've been through this discussion before. And I do recall that when we did go through it once before, I had the same view as Stuart, that I trust the special use process and didn't think that a distance requirement was necessary. I've changed my mind. And I think in part it has to do with neighbors it being difficult for neighbors to come forward when a neighbor proposes something that you don't want, but you still know they're going to be your neighbor, and you don't want to destroy that relationship by coming to oppose something that publicly that you do in fact oppose. I think a distance requirement really helps us control proliferation. And I am concerned about proliferation, whether there have been applications in the past 19 years or not. We are getting applications now, and it may be that, and it's obviously caused a great deal of consternation in the community. And I think we can alleviate the possibility that we're going to have R1 blocks turn into commercial by actually having distance requirements
So you're
as
saying
well
distance-
as the
oh.
special use. In
What
other
do you-
words,
what
I
do
think
you-
the special use process, more than anything else, is important for both type 1 and type 2. I think that a distance requirement as well, particularly on type 2, I'm softer on it with regard to type 1.
What do you
But I
think
think
would be
that
appropriate
really helps.
for type 1?
Well, I think the 1,500.
Really?
I'm sorry, for type 2, excuse me.
What do you think would be appropriate for type 1?
For type 1, I'd like to hear what other people have to say. I could go either way in terms of having a distance requirement or not on type 1. And I'd just like to hear what other people have to say on that point.
Go ahead.
I live in a neighborhood of half lots, so we're all 25 feet wide. What in the lakeshore area, in the area that's probably prime for B&Bs, what's the average lot width, roughly? 75 feet, 100 feet?
No.
Not that wide?
It can range anywhere from 45 feet, some 35-foot lots, on up to 100 feet
Oh,
wide.
100 feet. So that if we were,
Yeah, that's pretty much the exception.
okay, well, let's take a 100-foot lot. If we were to put in then a 500-foot distance requirement, that guarantees that at least there are 4 houses in between one B&B and the next. 1,500, even for the type 2, strikes me as excessive.
Agreed.
1,000, 750 maybe.
Didn't we have 900 originally?
900.
Like back out of zoning was 900, was what came out of zoning, right?
1,800 feet is from
I'm
Clark to
sorry.
Grove.
I'm sorry?
The 900 feet was in the previous discussion when
Okay.
B&Bs were discussed a year and a half ago.
As an FYI, 1,800 feet, if you just go diagonal from Judson and Clark to Grove and Hinman, that's 1,800 square feet. I don't think that,
Square feet?
I'm feet, linear feet. I didn't mean to say square feet. To me, Clark to, Davis, that seems to be it's a pretty small quadrant. I mean, that's why I think 1,800 or 1,500 is.
Do you feel that that's also appropriate for the type 1?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think that there should be a distance requirement. I just don't know what it should be. I don't think there's necessarily a right answer for it.
Mr. Lewis, you look ready.
Yeah, I more have questions. I think it's, and it has to do with the interrelationship between the special use process and the distance requirement. Is it, if it's codified as a distance requirement, taken out of the discretion of the special use people to allow less distance?
Thus,
or-
yes. If you have a minimum distance
You've
requirement,
taken away one of their
They don't,
tools
yeah.
to allow something.
they can,
Right.
one of the standards is cumulative impact. And so if they feel a larger distance requirement is needed to avoid cumulative impact, they can impose that. But if you have a minimum, they can't go the other way.
There's a set of standards that they have to go through and judge whether a project or proposal meets. And one of them is the cumulative impact.
Did you have other questions or comments?
Well, I guess I have kind of the comment that it seems to me that if everyone is perceiving, I kind of have this idea of the nature of a boarding house or renting rooms from a B&B as being something that, it's my impression that people who do a B&B, it is a business and something that they have to put an effort into, and is a little bit different. They have to wash sheets, they have to make breakfast for these people. They get more money, but they're actually providing a service, where people renting rooms are really just giving them a key and letting them go. So having the process of I'm sorry, I'm regressing to the special
Okay.
use process, but if they're willing to go through that effort to have a boarder, why aren't they willing to go and have a little bit extra effort to get permission to do that, is one point I think I have. And then it is more of a business, and if we treat it as a business, it seems that businesses are not something that's inherently part of a residential zoning, beneficial to a residential zone, and should be like a school is or something like that. And so it should be considered as something special. It's not inherently, part of the fabric of that kind of nature of zoning. And so.
Other comments on distance? That brings us to whether owner occupancy of the buildings should be required. We have a staff recommendation of ownership of 33%, as I recall.
For type 1.
Yeah,
That's for type 1, I think, yeah.
And any other comments about owner occupancy requirements?
I was wondering why the 33% was chosen for the recommendation.
That was discussed at zoning committee. Lots of different things were thrown out there. And so as staff saw it coming out of zoning committee, it seemed that 33% would be a logical recommendation. It gives the intent that if there's a property with 3 people on the title, each would have 33% ownership. Therefore, they would be eligible for the type 1. What we were trying to get away from is a corporation with 50 shareholders or someone who would own 1%. So we were trying to come up with some kind of cutoff, and we ended up with the 33%, thinking that that would bring in the type of B&B that a type 1 is intended to be.
Why was it not 50%?
That would definitely be a possibility. One of the things discussed at zoning committee is that some properties, especially larger properties, are often held in trust by children, and so there could easily be 3 owners rather than commonly that there's 2.
Ms. Mason-Camp, what legal problems do you see with this kind of ownership requirement, if any?
Michelle Mason-Cup, Chairman Peters, are you asking? So this ownership requirement was trying to address the situation in which an LLC may be member managed.
Well, I'm thinking you might have issues relating to LLCs. Mm-hmm. You might have issues of families with 4 children who inherit property and don't all continue to live there as adults. all kinds of combinations like that.
Right.
Which under the current ordinance then would require closing the B&B.
Right. Well, under the current ordinance, it doesn't define owner occupancy.
I mean under the
Okay.
proposal.
The proposal. There are so many structures in which people own the property. You're correct. We were just trying to propose something that seemed reasonable in keeping with what people think of as a mom and pop B&B, to use the term from the earlier discussion.
Mr. Ford, you look.
Well, I guess I'd go back to the notion that maybe in type 1, we want 100% ownership. And any ownership which is other than 100%. Now, this is, I suppose it imposes a burden on 3 children who jointly own the home in which they grew up. But if the 3 children are going to work out a B&B arrangement, let them treat it as a type 2 and go through the special use process.
Other comments on this?
Mr. Chairman, I think it is a bit arbitrary, but as counsel said, it's reasonable, and I think it will accomplish what we're looking to accomplish.
So you would support that for both types?
If I had a vote, I don't because I'm an associate member, but if I had a vote, I would support the 33%. You get the widowed, the widow and the brother and the.
For both, 33% for both?
No, I'm just talking about 1 right now.
What about 2?
That's another kettle of fish that perhaps I'm not prepared to answer at this moment.
I'd be prepared for the 100%. Sorry.
The rule is that the owner must also be the occupant, correct?
Oh, that's the question?
Yeah.
Okay, so the owner must be the occupant. So is it the rule or the proposed rule that the owner occupant must have a 33% interest?
That's correct.
That I assume is exclusive of the bank.
Well, I mean on title, yeah.
Yeah.
So the owner occupant would have to have a 33% interest. So hypothetically, if you had, siblings, 4 or 5 siblings, the one who is actually the occupant would have to have 33%. So they'd have to work that out amongst themselves. If they inherited the property, they'd have to just deal with that. That seems to be, I think, pretty reasonable, and I think that would actually promote or make it difficult for someone to circumvent, having, just being there nominally. And that's what I think. But I mean, to me, the key is just being an occupant. So, and then, meeting that. I think a 33% threshold is pretty. I think it's pretty reasonable. I think though it would have to be. I think we'd have to kind of look at the different structures. I mean, there are several. I agree, but there's a finite amount of structures, and I think maybe within an LLC or within a land trust, it's either going to be someone's going to either have an entity that has an interest, or they're going to have an interest themselves. But I think that's something that could be worked out, the finer points. But if we could, meet that threshold, I think it'd be good.
Sure. My concern is for the type 2, if we're getting into reasonability, if it's becoming a business and we're dictating how they organize and protect the asset of the business. I think that would be a little more difficult. But at the type 1, I think staff tried to recommend something that we thought would be reasonable.
I think that there are ways of going behind the mere percentage ownership to try to have these owner occupied rather than straight businesses, absentee owners. I think there's a way to do that, and I think it often can change the character of these kinds of units. It's not so easy to draft such a thing, I understand.
Staff recommends no requirement that we have an owner occupy the bed and breakfast in the type 2, right?
I think that's true. But I'm more concerned there that because without that, it's in effect a hotel operation rather than a bed and breakfast, other than the structure.
I mean, I think we all agree that it's very, very close. I mean, it is. It's a commercial operation. If you're going to have 5 guest rooms, it's really, for all intents and purposes, a commercial operation.
But I think it matters whether the owner is living there in terms of the type of operation.
Agreed. It's still commercial, but I think there will be more care taken of the property and reflection on what goes on the property.
I mean, we're speaking in generalities, which have huge exceptions.
It's another tipping point issue, isn't it? I mean, we're trying to find at what percentage of ownership does someone start to care about the property and the impact on the neighbors and such like.
Well, I'd like to see 100, but I don't think it's practical. I think.
But is a third?
I think things happen. People get divorced.
Sure.
The families change. The percentage of families with parents and children together in this country now is, I think, somewhere around 28%, maybe lower. So I don't know what it would mean to say 100%.
Now, I guess I was thinking more about type 2 and the idea of having no owner occupancy arrangement at all. If the argument is that we want someone on site who has skin in the game, then 33%, maybe that's a reasonable minimum. Does 33% would preclude the 2 licenses that have been granted, yes? Way preclude it. So recognizing the concern that this is a commercial venture in a residential neighborhood, a type 2, I'm not sure you can solve that problem through the owner occupancy requirement. I think you got to approach it some other way. Unless your expectation is that a type 2 is just a big family-owned bed and breakfast as opposed to a type 1, which is a little family-owned bed and breakfast.
I mean, you could, use other examples. For example, like an MBE or WBE, a minority-owned business enterprise or a woman-owned business enterprise. The standards there is that they have to have a 51% ownership interest. They got to have a majority. And 51% is, people understand that. It's a majority. There's no questions about, well, how do you come up with 33%?
Well, but you could pick a number, and 51 would be as reasonable as 33. The issue here is occupancy.
Well, I thought I heard that there was an occupancy requirement.
What I'm suggesting is that for the type 2s, I think staff's right, that an occupancy requirement for type 2 doesn't make sense.
It doesn't?
That's what we're discussing.
Oh, that's why I asked the question again. I heard that occupancy is a requirement, and I assumed that it was for 1 and 2, and so I misunderstood.
Staff recommends that it is not required for type 2.
Oh. I respectfully disagree with that recommendation.
And we also recommended that coming out of zoning.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Could I ask again, why was the recommendation not made for owner occupancy at some percentage for type 2?
The type 2, the intent behind it is that it's seen as more of a commercial enterprise. It very likely would be held by a corporation with multiple owners. So rather than having just the arbitrary current regulation where someone could purchase a 1% share or maybe even a $5 share, that since that doesn't get at the original intent, staff felt that it wouldn't make a difference if there isn't a requirement.
I guess my other question might be, since no one tonight really addressed the owner occupancy issue in their comments, at least not that I recall. You did.
There wasn't.
Is there, I guess I would ask Alderman Fisk, if I may, is it possible?
Do you want us to ask?
I would like to ask Alderman Fisk a question, and that is, in your sense of the comments that you've heard from the people you represent in your ward, is there strong sentiment one way or the other? Is it divided? Is it?
I think there's very strong sentiment for owner occupancy.
For whatever
For
type.
both type 1 and type 2.
And what does
I think
owner
that-
occupancy mean to you
It
personally?
means that there will be someone on site who has a relationship with the neighborhood and is responsive to the neighborhood, not an employee, for example. And I think that is, in the type 2 instance, a very, very important thing.
And was that something that was expressed in your meeting last night?
It was. We talked about owner occupancy, and we talked about the pitfalls of the 2 Bs and Bs, for example, that have been approved. I mean, frankly, I'm having a lot of trouble with the type 2 B and B in itself. But I really do think we need to have an owner, occupant, operator on site who is responsive to the neighborhood.
Okay. Now you said you think that.
Yes.
Would you also say
I'm speaking for my constituents,
Okay.
not me personally.
The majority of you?
I have no
of the
private life.
constituents who've expressed an opinion to you?
Yes, and many
The
have.
overwhelming majority?
We have talked about this for over 2 years. I mean, we've been through this, and Alderman Nguyen, I'm sorry, was supposed to be here tonight. This is her reference to you. I knew she was going to be delayed, and I'm sorry she couldn't be here, but I believe she's heard the exact same thing from her constituents as well. Hundreds of people.
You represented that to the zoning committee about a year and a half ago
Yeah.
or whatever.
Nothing has,
9 months ago.
Yeah, nothing has changed. We're very concerned about that.
Thank you.
Mr. Ford, you.
Nope. Not yet.
I suggest we take a 5-minute break. Some of the board members are squirming and may need to stretch, and we'll reconvene at 9:30. I think we have all of the commissioners back, and let me ask if there are other things that I mentioned 3 areas. If there are other areas that should be talked about before we address and vote on these 3 areas, at least take a straw poll. I should mention that if we end up with an owner occupancy requirement, probably the part of the ordinance that says such a person must be present at all times when there are guests might be not entirely practical, because they might need to go out and get groceries or something like that.
There's always Peapod.
It's true. There is people.
Sense of humor.
Any other parts of this question that we didn't touch on that someone wants to raise?
Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that the genesis of all of this started about 2 years ago, I guess I want to say, is when Jennifer Pritzker purchased the house at 300 Church Street and converted it into a bed and breakfast. That is still under construction. And then a while later, Jennifer Pritzker purchased the Armin Manassian house a few doors down from 300 Church. and sought approval for a bed and breakfast, and that was granted. If we require an owner to live on the premises, that would effectively foreclose Jennifer Pritzker for buying any more houses and converting them into bed and breakfasts. And I want to say, incidentally, that the work that Jennifer Pritzker has done in this community thus far has been exemplary. The Manassian property, for example, was on the market for about 4 or 5 years. And personally, I think that but for Jennifer Pritzker's involvement in purchase of that, the wrecking ball would soon have followed. So I, as a citizen, I really like the work that Jennifer Pritzker has done in this community. It's just something that perhaps we should think about when we vote on the issue of whether an owner must reside on the premises of a bed and breakfast.
Any other comments or other areas that we need to look at? Well, that brings us back to the question of whether special use should be required for the what's described as the moderate intensity maximum 2-bedroom B&B. Is there a discussion of that before we take a straw poll? Hearing no discussion, all those in favor of the special use requirement applying to both types of B&B? Let me do it differently. All those in favor of the special use requirement applying to type 1, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That has at least 5 votes. And all those in favor of the special use requirement for type 2.
I assume, Mr. Chairman, this is not a recorded vote.
This is not a recorded vote.
Okay. Thank you.
But when we have a consensus, when we see how people feel about these things which are interrelated, then we'll take a vote on a combination.
And Mr. Chairman, I will remind you once again that being an associate member, I do not have a vote, but I'm very definitely in favor of special use for both type 1 and type 2.
And let me ask about type 2. Is there anyone who does not favor special use for that? Okay, so that takes us through special use, and we should look at distance requirements. Any comments about distance requirements?
I suppose there are 2 questions, Mr. Chairman. One is whether we want a distance requirement at all, and if yes, then what?
Let me start with type 2, just because it's easier. Is there anyone who favors distance requirements for type 2? That's certainly a majority. And who would favor a 1,500-foot distance requirement? 2. Maybe a discussion on what other people would favor would be helpful. Looking at type 2.
750.
Why?
Why not?
It's nice to be chair and just say why.
600, if that's the block.
Seth and I are in a bidding war here.
If it's a block is 600 feet, then you shouldn't have more than one a block.
600.
If it helps, within the packet, there is a buffer map that shows a distance requirement in 250-foot increments.
It would be 660 for an 8-block mile.
There you go, there's 600 feet right there. Takes up a lot of space.
And how do the other members feel about what's an appropriate distance requirement for the type 2?
against distance requirements. I think it's discretionary of the special use, so.
Let me ask, how many would favor not having a distance requirement for type 2?
Can I change my vote?
You can. 1, 2, 3,
Make it special use.
and 4. No distance requirement.
No distance requirement.
And let me ask again, how many favor some distance requirement? 1, 2,
Type 2 this is.
type 2, 3, 4.
We're split.
We're split. So if we had a distance requirement of 660, would some of you change your vote?
Yes.
So who would favor for type 2, 660, which is
Change
a,
your vote.
yeah, so we don't have a 4-to-4 split.
But I thought, Commissioner Ford, you were for a distance requirement.
I'm unhappy with a 1,500-foot
Oh.
requirement.
So if we had 660, you would support it? You would support it? I would support it? Anyone else?
Willie, are you looking at those rings?
Let me ask what you would support if it's not 1,500? If you would support something smaller than 1,500? I know 6 miles is better, but
I mean, there's no real rhyme or reason. I mean, what would get us to consensus is what you're asking?
I'm seeing if there is something that would get us to consensus.
How about 1,000?
Would that bring us to a consensus? No. Maybe we will end up making a recommendation of a distance requirement, but not something specific.
But if we're split 50-50, you also got to say we were split 50-50, right? So,
But I don't know, are we split 50-50 on any distance requirement for type 2? I don't think so.
Well, I think when you took the vote at 1,500, you had 4 people?
Yeah,
And then when you did it at 600,
yeah.
you had 4 people.
How many favor no distance requirement for type 2? 1, 2, 3, 4. How many favor a distance requirement for type 2? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's look at owner occupancy. Let me start with type 1. How many would favor the staff's recommendation for type 1 of 33%? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So and for type 2, how many would favor a similar requirement? 1. How many?
You got another 2, 3.
1, 2, 3, 4.
That's 33%, you're saying.
Yeah. And I would vote for that too.
For type 2.
Yeah. Let me go back and see if anyone has, if we have that kind of requirement, if there are any changes in people's feeling about distance requirements.
for which one, type 2?
Yeah.
think if you have that kind of owner occupancy requirement for type 2, the whole rest of the discussion is irrelevant.
Can you elaborate?
I don't think you're going to get type 2s with an owner occupancy requirement.
I think you may get type 2, but you may not get the type 2 of the type that are being developed today. Complete rehabs and high-end everything. It'll be taking advantage of the house the way it exists, so that an owner who decides that kids are gone, I've got a 5-bedroom or an 8-bedroom house or whatever it is, and I want to rent out 4 or 5, they may do that. So I think in that respect, you could get a type 2. You'll just be excluding the Jennifer Pritzker type of renovation, boutique B&Bs.
Yeah, the hotel developer.
But of course, we are not talking about any specific person.
Of course we're not, but that's the type of development
Exemplar.
that would be excluded.
Let me ask, if we put aside distance and owner occupancy, how many would support the ordinance presented to us by staff, including a special use requirement for both types?
If we put aside what?
If we put aside the, go away. If we put, what I'm looking for is to see if people would support or a recommendation of the ordinance as recommended by staff with special use requirements for both type 1 and type 2. I'm not asking, if we defer consideration of the distance requirement in an owner occupancy question. I'm trying to see if there's anything else in the proposed ordinance that people support or don't support. We haven't talked about the whole proposed ordinance, so I suppose I should see if there's discussion first. Hearing no discussion, let me ask how, we have 5 members that support special use for both types of bed and breakfast. Would you also support the remainder of the ordinance other than the distance and owner occupancy requirements?
Assuming the special use requirement?
Yes.
You trying to move something?
I am trying to move something because otherwise we'll be back here soon. And I don't know that we'll know any more than we do tonight.
Well, perhaps maybe we could take a vote on the recommendation as written. And first.
Okay,
Just
that
A
sounds
straw
good.
vote is what you're saying?
Yeah, as written.
How many would support the recommendation as written? It's not so many.
Okay,
0.
okay.
How many would support the recommendation with a change for special use, requiring it for both types, and not including anything about the distance requirement and owner occupancy requirement?
I'm sorry, can we go back? The
Both require special use.
the both require, is the, as recommended, there's the zoning committee recommended and there's the staff. So which one were we just voting on?
I assume the staff.
Okay.
And no one.
Okay,
voted for that.
that's what I was voting on, okay.
So now I'm trying to see if we have enough consensus to recommend the ordinance without the provisions for distance and owner occupancy, which we'll take up later, and but with a special use for both types. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we probably have a consensus on that.
You doing a Gantt chart over there? What are you doing?
I'm trying to keep track of what people think, but it's not so easy. Any suggestions with respect to the other two issues? And otherwise, we'll, I think, probably be in a position to make a recommendation that's not addressing everything.
Oh,
I wonder, Mr. Chairman, if you want to move this, maybe what you want is an up or down vote individually on each item, and out of that will come a draft ordinance that will go to council.
I think we can do that, although on the distance requirement, we might not have a successful up or down vote. But we do have a consensus then on special use, we have a majority for special use for both types and the other portions of the ordinance. Owner occupancy requirement.
I think if that's a formal vote, Mr. Chairman, on special use.
We haven't gotten there yet to formal vote.
yeah, I think if you look, I thought we, wasn't there an intersection on special use and no distance requirement for type 1?
It's possible.
I think you had that intersection someplace down there.
It's possible. Do you want to propose that?
Well, we haven't done the owner occupancy, so I'll propose for type 1, on type 1 to require a special use, owner occupancy of 33% with no distance requirement. And take a straw vote on that. That's what they have, that staff recommends it. See if, but I think that's what you have there.
So the suggestion is owner occupancy, special use,
no distance requirement.
no distance.
Because I think that's what
Essentially, the staff recommendation.
Staff recommendation for type 1.
For type 1.
Yeah,
And who would favor that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Can you make that a motion?
I make a motion that we recommend to the council to adopt a staff recommendation for type 1, moderate intensity bed and breakfast of 2 maximum guest rooms. Special use is required. Owner occupancy of 33% with no distance requirement.
Is there discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that has 7 votes and therefore passes.
All right, we got that out of the way.
Do you want to do a motion with respect to type 2?
Well, I only did that one based on my recollection of the numbers there. And I am a statistician, so let's see. I don't know what to do because of that distance requirement on.
Mr. Chairman, if you want a motion, I will move the staff recommendation on type 2 with the exception of the distance requirement, which I would reduce to 660 feet.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
That means no owner occupancy, correct?
Correct.
Is there a second for that? Fails for want of second. How many would favor a requirement for type 2 owner occupancy and special use without a distance requirement.
No
By
distance
owner
requirement?
occupancy, I mean 33% without a distance requirement.
You mean not considering a distance requirement?
Right.
Or?
No, I mean
yes,
without
no.
considering a distance requirement.
That'd be special use, and they would determine based on the standards.
1, 2, 3.
Well, that went nowhere.
Is there any suggestion here? Page 5.
We're hung up on two things. We're hung up on owner, we're hung up on feet. That's it.
Both?
Well, let me just ask about straight owner question. How many would recommend that there be no ownership requirement for type 2? 1,
2.
2,
Yeah, I'll put my hand back up for that.
3.
The same 3. Huh?
And how many would recommend a 33% ownership for type 2? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So make a motion.
Can I ask someone who favors that to make a motion?
I motion a recommendation to require an owner occupancy requirement.
Any percent there?
The
33%.
33% for type 2.
Is there a second?
Is this owner/occupant or just the owner requirement?
I don't know how you would have an owner. It's owner occupancy.
It's okay. It's occupant.
Yeah.
Okay.
There'll always be an owner, except maybe Tuesdays. Is there a second on that? Surely with 5 people raising their hands, there must be a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I second it. It's the
Okay.
owner occupancy requirement of 33%.
Right,
Plus special use for type 2?
right.
Okay, I second.
All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That passes.
We haven't done the distance.
If this is a formal vote, record that there was at least one voting no.
Well, this is just
There was
straw.
more than one voting no.
Oh, this is not straw then.
Right.
No, but that didn't include distance.
Right.
Okay.
So I guess we should record, there were 5 in favor, and how many were opposed?
3.
1, 2, 3. Did you get that? And how many were opposed to the staff recommendations for type 1?
No, we did
Okay,
type 1 already.
that, I know, but we didn't record opposition, so
There was. Lenny, he
I think Lenny opposed it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was only 1.
And that brings us down to distance requirements.
Could we vote again as to how many of us favor a distance requirement of some sort versus
Yes,
none?
good idea.
Just straw vote?
Straw vote?
Of some sort.
How many favor a distance requirement as opposed to no distance requirement? 1, 2, 3, 4, and I do 2. And does anyone want to make an argument about an appropriate distance requirement? Any further argument? Maybe we will not succeed with this.
Now, my feeling is you shouldn't have more than 1 on a block or across the street from each other.
You want to put that in the form of a motion?
I don't know how to put that in the, because you can't really measure, I guess you can measure a block, you know? I motion that you cannot have more than one type 2 high-intensity bed and breakfast on a block, and that includes across the street from each other.
As measured down the center of both sides of a
Yeah.
street, a block long.
Yeah.
And would
That
anyone,
includes kitty corner, so I mean, you know, you can't be kitty corner across the street. It's,
a block with kitty corner? And who would favor that?
What's that, what's the motion?
See how you can make
I
that
don't,
work.
you gotta have, you have to
okay.
have a footage, I think. I mean, just to say across the street, what was it?
Well, it was
It was a full block.
A full block.
A full block.
But then he had
Or
a kitty.
a block. I mean, there are blocks.
There are
From
blocks and
Kedzie
there are
to Keeney, for example, that's twice as long as any other block in Evanston. So I think you have to reduce it to a number of feet.
Any suggestions about number of feet? But we can't get a consensus on 660 and 15 or 1,500?
It seems to me, unless we absolutely must give an up or down vote on this, that there could be a recommendation that there be a distance requirement that's supported by 5 of us.
That's certainly possible.
You know, with, if we have 2 of the 5 at 660 and 3 of the 5 at some other place, you know,
It's
let's
certainly
simply
possible to report out
because we don't
no
seem to be able-
consensus, no majority for a
the
specific
amount of the
distance requirement.
even though there's a majority for a distance. And we could also say ranging anywhere from
If you wish to make such
660
a
to
motion,
1,500.
that would be
my
fine.
motion, that we recommend a distance requirement ranging between 660 feet and 1,500. And if we can't get consensus on that, then
Then we'll try again.
it seems to me, we should-
I just think you should go with,
We don't have
say that we don't
consensus.
have a consensus on distance.
Let me see if there's a second for that motion. Do you want to make a motion for distance requirement without a specific number of feet?
I move that we recommend a distance requirement. I don't know if I can go on to say, but I will, of no less than 660 feet.
Is there a second for that motion? I think the record is fairly clear that there is not agreement on a distance requirement. Is there a motion to recommend a distance requirement without specific number of feet?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Is there a motion to make a recommendation to City Council without a reference to distance requirement? To recommend
the
what
rest,
we
everything else?
we have already approved with no distance requirement.
So moved.
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm pleased to tell you, even the people who voted no get to go home tonight. Do we need to do anything else with respect to this item? The remaining item,
But you will report that we could not agree on a distance.
it's very clear. It's not ambiguous. The remaining item is
Oh, yeah.
comprehensive plans, and I want to assure the committee that although the comprehensive planning subcommittee has not met
I would like to thank you.
in some time, we will resume in January. You should be receiving a memo of summary of what's been done in that regard in the last few years. I'd like to thank all of you for your participation.
Thank you.
And frank comments. Thank you. Anything else other than a motion to adjourn? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Wait, we do have some housekeeping.
Go ahead.
First off, being that it is December, we do need a motion for a chair and vice chair.
It's for next year.
Correct.
Put us on the spot, why don't you?
And what other housekeeping do we have? We always think about this for a minute.
Other than that, with the recent turnover of some committee members, we are now one member short for the zoning committee. My records indicate that the zoning committee is made up of Commissioners Ford, Puda, Schur, and Peters.
Got me.
I'm not on it.
See, that's why I don't get the email. She doesn't have me on.
I've got you. You don't vote. You can't vote though.
Well, on the committee, I can't.
But on the
Yes, he can vote.
I can vote on the committee.
Are we in violation? What's the expiration on the term for the chair and vice chair? Is there an expiration date?
The Plan Commission rules state that every December a vote should be taken.
So I can't make a motion then to defer it to January. It's basically what you're saying.
Oh.
Sure, why not?
Then I make that motion.
Our rules change.
Are you up to doing it again?
Well, if
I
we
don't
wanted,
know. I have to think about that and figure out how to.
Because even though you're aggravating as heck, you're damn good.
Oh, you are very kind.
I'd only make a motion to defer it until January, just so that now that we're aware of it, we can, I think about it and actually be prepared.
I would support that. And I'm not sure if I would re-up, and I can think of some other people who would be wonderful. So is there a second for that motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Other,
Is that for the zoning committee as well? Because we,
no. I think between now and,
I'll make a motion on zoning. Rich Shore currently is the chair for zoning, and I recommend that we have him take it for another year.
right, I'm relating it to the members of the zoning committee.
I think we just need members. Let me ask, typically the new members become involved with the zoning committee. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to do that too? It's a subcommittee that hears what comes before them are proposed changes in the zoning.
Kind of like B&Bs.
And they make, you get to do it twice.
And it's another Wednesday
And
commitment.
they make recommendations to the Plan Commission.
I seriously would have to think about it for just a little bit.
Okay. Who would be interested in continuing to work on the Comprehensive Plan Subcommittee?
Are we done with zoning, though? Sorry.
We have a deferral, and other than that,
Well, that
we're
was, what about the existing members? Don't they have to re-up if they want to stay on it?
I think they are willing to stay on it.
Okay.
We don't have many existing members
Okay.
left. They
Okay.
are all going away.
I'm still here.
I know, it's great. The comprehensive plan,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mark Munzer, Director of Community Development. Please keep in mind a couple of you do have terms that are expiring in 2014.
I am aware of that.
So when you come back in January, make sure that that's part of the conversation. Certainly don't want to nominate somebody that's going to be gone in the next few months.
Who are they?
I think mine is up.
Seth Freeman is up in March. Scott Peters is no, you're not till 2015, sorry.
Oh, what do you know?
And Barbara,
But I'll be resigning after this meeting.
understood.
You're coming back.
Well, I would like to.
We would like.
To the president.
I am sure we will need your expertise, and everyone will agree.
I just wanted you to keep that in mind.
I suggest we finalize the committees at our next meeting, and people think about what they're going to do, and we may even have another member coming on. Any other housekeeping or other business?
That would be all.
Motion to adjourn.
Second, all those in favor? Yes.